All right, well, let's turn to 2 Samuel chapter 15. Second Samuel chapter 15. So last week gave us a reunion. It wasn't all that it seemed to be. It wasn't entirely what it looked like or seemed to be. Absalom, of course, after killing his brother, has been in exile, was in exile for 3 years. And though David had a desire for some manner of reconciliation, right? There's that difficult balance that he has to strike as a loving, compassionate father and a just and righteous king. And it's kind of hard to balance those. And so he allowed his son to remain in exile for a number of years through Joab's plot there and the use of the woman to come and convince him through her story to reconcile, to bring Absalom back. David gave in. David agreed to allow Absalom to return to Israel, to return to Jerusalem, kind of. Right? He allowed him to come back to Jerusalem, but he would not see him. He wouldn't bring him to the palace. He wouldn't bring him to where the king was. And that went on for a couple of years. And eventually, Absalom is getting frustrated with that. Absalom demands of Joab a couple of different times to have an audience with the king. And Joab won't even respond to him. So you remember what Absalom did. He had his fields burnt. He was going to get Joab's attention one way or another. And he does, and Joab finally relents, and the king finally relents, and they agree to a meeting. And that's what happens at the end of chapter 14. The Joab comes, meets his father, the king. It's now been 5 years. Absalom's back, but at a distance. And the reunion that happens at the end of chapter number 14, there's not much there. There's not much to that. In fact, Absalom has already purposed and committed in his heart to the events of chapter number 15. So if last week's lesson was Absalom's return, tonight's lesson is Absalom's rebellion. Absalom has conspiracy in mind. Absalom is still bitter for the events that happened that his father did not address. He's bitter for the fact that he had to remain in exile for taking action against something that he thinks his father should have done. He doesn't feel like he's done anything wrong, and yet he was exiled from Israel for 3 years. And even when he was brought back home, he had to sit another 2 years, not necessarily in house arrest, but certainly not free to have access to the king. And Absalom is frustrated and bitter. And that has turned him against his father. Number one, Absalom's treachery. Absalom's treachery. 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse number 1, it says, "It came to pass after this that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him." Now that he's been welcomed back into Jerusalem, now that he's had an audience with the king, Absalom goes about setting up a conspiracy. And the first way that he does that is that he creates a grand spectacle, right? This grand parade inside the city in Jerusalem where he gathers chariots and horses, 50 men to run before him, right? This is all about the spectacle. It's all about making everything seem like it's okay, right? Things are fine. Things are great. I've been welcomed home. I'm back to next in command. I'm back to the heir to the throne, perhaps. Whatever his intentions were, Absalom at least wants to give appearance that things are great. And so they've got this great spectacle. They've got this great parade. He gets these men. He gets chariot. He gets horses because he wants to give off a certain appeal or a certain impression. And doing this will add to the impression he's trying to make, right? Now, verse number 2. Absalom also, it says there, Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And it was so that when any man had a controversy, came to the king for judgment, then Absalom called unto him and said, Of what city art thou? And he said, Thy servant is one of the tribes of Israel. Absalom would get up early, in an attempt to show himself as diligent, as hardworking. He welcomed men to bring him their complaints. There was a time when folks could appeal to Jerusalem with their complaints, maybe even to the throne, maybe even to the king. Now Absalom has set himself up here toward the gates of the city, and when bring their complaints and when bring their controversies, and their intent is to go to the king for judgment, Absalom kind of intervenes like, okay, well, tell me about this. Where are you from, right? You think, nice guy, right? Absalom's going to step in. Absalom's going to help. He sets himself up there. He's going to talk to folks that bring their controversies. Look at verse 3. And Absalom said unto him, See, thy matters are good and right, but there is no man deputed of the king to hear thee. Absalom, when men would bring their complaints, he would seem genuine and he would seem interested. And yet he would act as though the king wasn't doing his duty. Now, he doesn't make direct accusation against the king himself, but you can tell what he's doing here. Man, that's a terrible story. You could imagine someone bringing their complaint to the gate or bringing their complaint in an attempt to appeal to the king, and Absalom jumps in like, okay, well, tell me about it, man. Where are you from? What's going on? And the guy would tell where he's from and would tell his story, and Absalom was like, man, that's terrible, or that's good and right. You're right. Somebody needs to do something about this, man. You're getting the short end of the stick, or man, that's a bum deal. And somebody ought to hear this case. Somebody ought to hear your complaint. But unfortunately, the king doesn't have anybody that can do that. The king doesn't have anybody that he can kind of set up over your area or set up for these kind of complaints. And now's just not a good time. He's not going to be able to hear you. He's not going to be able to set up anybody to hear you, right? Absalom has kind of interjected himself, not by the king's will, not by the king's command, but in an attempt to impress others, in an attempt to gain followers, to impress folks. What does he do? He pretends like everything's great. He sets up a great spectacle and a parade. Hey, I'm back. Things are great. He's starting to interject himself into these conversations and in these appeals and in these controversies that people are bringing into Jerusalem. Verse number 4, Absalom said, Moreover, that I were made judge in the land, that every man which hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. Man, I'm really sorry to hear about your story. I'm really sorry that something ought to be done about that. Boy, I tell you what, if I were in charge, that's what Absalom's saying there in verse number 4. That I were made. You know what? If I were a judge, if I were put in charge, I'd do something about your case. Man, you've got every right to be upset. You've got every right to bring this complaint. Unfortunately, the king doesn't have anybody that can take care of you right now. Tell you what, though, if I were in charge, I'd see to it that this was taken care of. Man, this is a big deal. And if I were in charge, I'd make sure that you got justice. I'd make sure that this was done right, that this was handled, that this was taken care of. That I were made judge in the land, that every man which hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. Now, what is Absalom doing here? Absalom is stirring the pot. He is stirring up discontent, dissatisfaction, division among the people. He's sowing what the Bible would say is discord. He is working himself into the controversies that people have. He's not making them better. He's actually making them worse. We're not given any indication that what Absalom is saying here is true. Absalom, in an attempt to win followers and to impress people and to get people to listen to him and like him and follow after him, he's pretending to hear their complaints with compassion and with care. And he doesn't care. That's not what he's there for. He's trying to win folks from following his father and to follow him. Man, this is a bum deal. If I were in charge, I'd take care of you. And in doing so, he's getting people to see him as loving and compassionate and a good ear and someone that would help, and turn against the current regime, turn against the current way of things, or against the current king, David. Now, the Bible warns about this kind of stuff, right? Listen, this is according to Proverbs chapter 6. I'm going to read a couple verses in Proverbs here. This is something that the Bible says God hates when people do. And that is when people sow discord, when people intentionally stir up strife, right? That is not wise. It's not good. And God doesn't like it when people do that, right? When you intentionally try to stir someone up, when you intentionally try to stir the pot, get people mad at each other, bring division, bring discontent amongst people, that's wrong. Don't do that. And that's exactly what Absalom is doing here. In Proverbs chapter 6, he says in verse 16, "These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. A proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, and heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among the brethren." Well, you wouldn't think that something like that is on a list compared to things like murderer and false, like lying, false witnessing, or hearts that devise wicked imagination. That's what Absalom's doing. And he's sowing discord. Here you've got people that have brought their complaints to Jerusalem. We don't know that David's not willing to hear these complaints. These complaints never make it to David, because here Absalom sits at the gate. "Oh, well, tell me about it, man. Tell me, where are you from? What's going on? Tell me your story." And it never even gets to David. And yet Absalom's saying, "No, I'm sorry, nobody's going to be able to help you with that. But I'll tell you what, if I were in charge, somebody would. If I were in charge, this would be fixed. This would be better." It's all a game, right? It's all a show. It's all a scene that Absalom is working up to gain a loyal following, to impress people. In the book of Proverbs, if you're there, chapter 10. Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 12. "Hatred stirreth up strifes, but love covereth all sins." Proverbs chapter 26. Verse number 20, "These are words of wisdom. Where no wood is, the fire goeth out." And that's exactly what Absalom is doing. He is stoking these fires. He's intentionally putting people against his father. You know, he's doing it in such a way that he's not actually directly attacking David, right? You wouldn't think that. You wouldn't see it in that language. He's not necessarily saying, "My father, this is his fault," or "your king doesn't love you," or "your king doesn't care about you." But he is manipulating the conversation. He is, for the term that's popular nowadays, using a bit of gaslighting. He's actually he's lying to people about these situations, and here they're left thinking David won't help, the king won't help. And if Absalom was in charge, he would help. And they look at Absalom as compassionate. And they look at him as caring. And they look at him as loving. And they don't get that from David. And so this is intentional. Don't be like that. We are encouraged to not feed division. We are encouraged to not stir up strife. Absalom is intentionally stoking this fire and trying to cause ill will and ill feelings toward his father. Let's go back to our text in chapter 15. 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse number 5 says, "And it was so that when any man came nigh to him to do him obeisance, he put forth his hand and took him and kissed him." Here you've got Absalom presenting himself as what? A man of the people. Because here's the king's son, and guess what happens when people come to see the king's son? They're going to naturally show him reverence, or as the Bible would say, obeisance, and perhaps bow down to him, or maybe, bow the knee to your majesty, or, the next in line, the heir to the throne, David's son. But what does Absalom do when people come to do that? You're someone that comes before Absalom, and you get ready to bow down. And no. He takes them, he shakes their hand, he gives them a hug, and he gives them a kiss. And what is that? I'm one of you, right? He's a man of the people. He's not this high and lofty king like his father. He's not this one that's so far removed from the common man. He's one of you, right? Listen, politicians have been doing this kind of stuff a long time, right? Absalom is like the perfect politician. He knows what to say to get you riled up against the current administration. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's just in the way that he spins the words. He's just sly enough and cunning enough with his language that who knows if it's true or false. It sounds good. It sounds right. And he looks the part. We talked about that last week. He's handsome. Got a good head of hair on his head. Got a good young family, it looks like. I mean, he looks the part. And now he's showing them, he's a common man just like they are. They don't bow to me. Get up here, man. Give me a hug. Shake. This is for show. This is absolutely for show. Verse number 6 says, "And on this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel." Absalom worked diligently. Okay? Remember what it said in verse 2. That he rose up early. Absalom has been working diligently, working hard to gain a following, to impress people, to get people to like him. Doesn't mean that everything that he's saying here is true. This is for show. This is sly. It's cunning. Again, he's clever. He's subtle. In doing all that he has done, he has impressed Israel. Israel's impressed. And now there's that portion of Israel that, in their hearts, they always wondered, did Absalom really ever do, did Absalom really do anything wrong? Didn't he do what 100 other fathers would have done or husbands would have done in that same scenario? And now he comes back, and you know what? It looks like he's been welcomed back into Jerusalem, right? I mean, here's a big parade and the chariots and the horses and the procession that's going through. And here he is now sitting at the gate, and he's starting to handle people, or at least take their questions and their controversies. Absalom is working hard to put on this great spectacle and this great show that he is a man of the people, and they buy it. Israel falls for it, hook, line, and sinker. Now listen, you and I both know, and Israel's only had a couple of kings, but based on the way that this is laid out for us, both with Saul and with Absalom, this is what Israel likes. Israel likes kings that look the part, right? That story hasn't changed much, right? That's when people decide on their leaders, what do people like? We like leaders that are charismatic, strong-willed, that look the part, right? Absalom is so subtle, and he's deceptive, and he's doing some underhanded tricks here. He feels totally justified, it seems, right? He's been exiled, and he's rebelling against his father. And the way that he starts that off is that he steals the hearts. He steals their loyalty. He comes on presenting that he is their answer, that if he was in charge, things would be so much better. That if somebody would just give him a chance, he's a man of the people, he'd be for them. He stole their hearts, and Israel bought it. Israel fell right in for it. Now again, how is it that their hearts were stolen? Well, obviously, David is getting older. David's sins have hurt his standing, in a sense, right? David, you gave occasion for them to blaspheme, for the enemies to blaspheme. David's sins have hurt his standing. People are fickle. People like change. You can have a really good king in there, and yet there's always going to be that portion of the population that's, ready for a change. People are fickle. And here comes Absalom looking the part. He's smooth, he's cunning, he is a great politician. He knows how to sow the right amount of dissatisfaction among people, and he steals their hearts. And now the people start to love him more than they love David. Number 2, Absalom the traitor. The traitor. Verse number 7, it says that it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said unto the king, I pray thee, let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed unto the Lord in Hebron. For thy servant vowed a vow while I abode at Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord shall bring me again indeed to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. Now he's ready to enact his plan. Now that he has stolen their hearts, now that he knows he can command the loyalty, at least of a certain percentage of the population, he asks for leave that he might go to Hebron. He says here in this passage, I made a vow. And when I was away, and when I was in exile, he says, I made a vow that if the Lord would bring me again to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. Right? God, if you get me out of this situation, if you let me return home, then I will serve you. And he asks for leave so that he can go to Hebron and make whatever this service is. There's probably some kind of sacrifice. There'll probably be some kind of ceremony or celebration or whatnot there. He's going to cloak his treason with worship. He's going to cloak it with spirituality. He's using a spiritual sense, or he's using spirituality as an appearance, because that's effective, right? That's effective. How can you challenge his motives, right? How can you challenge Absalom, man? Not only is he good for the people, not only is he a man of the people, man, but he's going to go and keep his vows before the Lord. And he asks for leave, and according to verse number 9, the king said unto him, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. Here's the problem. He doesn't have any intention of serving the Lord in Hebron. That's not what this was about. This was about getting out of Jerusalem. This was about having a way that he could get back outside of that city and enact his plot, enact his plan. Notice there, when he's given that permission in verse number 9, verse 10 says that Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as ye hear the sound of the trumpet, then ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. You put the word together. He sent spies out throughout all the land of Israel. Put the word out. Rally those that are going to be true to our cause, those that are loyal, those that are fed up, those that are discontent with David, and those that are ready to follow. And you let them know, according to verse number 10, that when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, ye shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. It's interesting the way that he words that. It almost looks like he wants this to look like succession, right? He almost wants this to look like the crowning of the next king, like there's nothing wrong, right? This is treachery. This is treason against his father. This is treason against the king of Israel. And so in verse number 10, when they proclaim, or when they make the sound of the trumpet and holler and yell and proclaim that Absalom reigneth in Hebron, that is treason. And with Absalom, verse 11, went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. Not only that, Absalom has brought 200 men from Jerusalem, and they don't know anything about the conspiracy. You got 200 men, and you're probably talking about high officials, either in some religious, spiritual sense, or in governmental sense, officials in the land. They don't know anything about a conspiracy. They know that Absalom's been released to go to Hebron and make his vows, and obviously there's going to be some kind of procession that follows and men that follow, and there's going to be a big to-do with this, and these men don't have any idea what's going on. They go in their simplicity, it says. They knew not anything. They thought, okay, we're going to go to Hebron. We're going to watch this ceremony, or we're going to watch this sacrifice. And before they know it, they're caught right in the middle of a conspiracy to put somebody else on the throne. And Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. To make it even worse, he calls for this man named Ahithophel. Brother John, when coming through the book of Psalms, talked to us about who Ahithophel was. A very trusted counselor of King David. One that had been in time past loyal to him, been faithful to him. They had been friends and trusted companions. Now, for whatever reason, perhaps stemming back from the adulterous affair with Bathsheba, that event or something that's conspired in between now and then, Absalom is able to turn Ahithophel against his father. And that is a striking blow because, one, it's a trusted friend. It's a counselor of David. 2 Samuel chapter 16 speaks of what it says that in the counsel of Ahithophel, which he counseled in those days, was as if a man had inquired at the oracle of God. So was all the counsel of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom. When I say trusted counselor, don't shortchange that. You've got a guy that folks see like, this guy speaks with wisdom. This guy speaks with wisdom like it's come from God. Ahithophel is a most trusted and wise man. And if you can turn someone like that, that carries weight, right? That carries weight with it. And when Ahithophel turns, and it sounds like maybe some of these 200 men that leave Jerusalem and follow, initially not knowing or thinking that anything was wrong, and then they get caught in the middle of it, plus these others that he's taken aside with him. Now Absalom's got a following. And he's got powerful men. He's got recognized men with him. And so it says there in verse 12 that the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. That's what momentum is, right? When once folks start coming, others are encouraged to come. And as more folks become loyal and as more folks begin to follow the cause of Absalom, more people see that and they're like, you know what? They're right. It is time for a change. And I'm not sure that David did right when he exiled Absalom and didn't let him come back. And maybe we should give Absalom a shot. Maybe he would be a better king. And maybe our cause would have a better audience. And more and more and more people start to follow Absalom. And David, who just within the last couple chapters had fought wars, delivered Israel, established a great, mighty, powerful, expansive kingdom, people are turning on him. People are turning on him to follow his son. Number 3, David takes flight. And we won't have time to read all of this, so let's just read a few more verses tonight. Verse 13, and there came a messenger to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. David, they've turned on you. They're following Absalom. Unfortunately, what's going on in Hebron right now really doesn't have much to do with sacrifices. It doesn't have much to do with serving the Lord. This was a plot. This was a scheme to get him isolated, to get him out of Jerusalem so that he could amass a following, so that he could amass. If this happens in Jerusalem, David, it's not going to go anywhere, right? If it happens in Jerusalem, there's enough that are loyal to David initially. There's still enough that are there that they can put a stop to that. But he gets outside of Jerusalem, and he gets out among the people, and he gets to Hebron. He gets to this isolated place where he can rally folks to his cause. And by the time it gets back to David, what has happened, the conspiracy is strong, and multitudes are starting to follow after him. And it says in verse number 13 that the hearts of men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto all his servants that were with him at Jerusalem, arise, and let us flee. for we shall not else escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring evil upon us and smite the city with the edge of the sword. David knows his son. David could see what was coming. Absalom is ruthless. Now, he would feel that that's justified. David knows that that's part of his character, and if we don't go now, we don't go. If we have to flee, we have to escape now. David, still a loving king to his people and these loyal followers of his, David does not want to risk his family, his close supporters. David, according to verse number 14, does not want to turn Jerusalem into a war zone. He mentions there in verse 14 about smiting the city with the edge of the sword. He does not want to see all-out open civil war right in the capital. And so he says, we got to go. We have to flee. Else, for we shall not else escape from Absalom. We have to go, and we have to go now. That is a terrible turn of events for King David. I wonder what Joab's thinking through all that. It says in verse 15 that the king's servant said unto the king, behold, thy servants are ready to do whatsoever my lord the king shall appoint. I want you to notice there how the writer emphasizes, no matter what's going on in Hebron, no matter what Absalom says, no matter how great the conspiracy goes, in verse number 15, the writer of 2 Samuel is trying to reemphasize to you, David is the king. He's the rightful king of Israel. Notice that again 3 times. And the king's servants said unto the king, behold, thy servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king shall appoint. You know, David is still the rightful king. And thank the Lord for those that are still loyal to him and will support him. And you've got men here that are willing, it seems, to jeopardy themselves. King, whatever you need us to do, you tell us. We're faithful. We'll do whatever your bidding is, whatever you would have us to do. But David knows that they have to go. They have to leave. And the king went forth, and all his household after him. And the king left 10 women, which were concubines, to keep the house. That's going to end up fulfilling some prophecies that were made to David previously, and that's not going to end well. But you can see that David tries to get most of his family, these concubines, a handful of them are left behind to keep watch over the house. And then it says that the king went forth, and all the people after him, and tarried in a place that was far off. And all his servants passed on beside him, and all the Cherethites, and all the Pelethites, and all the Gittites, 600 men which came after him from Gath, passed on before the king. When you read in the book of Psalms, and you read about David's sorrow at times in his life, David is a man that gets put through untold amounts of sorrow and heartache. And here, after he's built this kingdom, and after he has established this capital, and after he's expanded Israel to heights of glory that it never saw under the period of the judges, that it never saw under the time of Saul, and that it won't see under the reign of most of the kings that are still yet to come for the nation of Israel. For all that David has done, now he is the one that has to evacuate. Now he is the one that has to escape with his life. Absalom has sown so much discontent and dissatisfaction among the people that he has stolen their loyalty and their love. And David has had his shortcomings, and David has had his faults. And yet we know that David is fiercely loyal to the God of Israel and to the Israel of God. And he loves his people. And he is a good king, minus his shortcomings and the faults that we've read. David has attempted to regain honor. He has attempted to restore justice and return to being a king that has done what is right. But this episode with Absalom and David's hesitation, one way or another, right? Either to make a decision to execute Absalom or to leave him in exile forever. David's hesitation in that did nothing but spark bitterness and fury in Absalom, and he is turned against his father with all kinds of vengeance. When people allow that bitterness, and I think we've mentioned this a couple times here in these lessons, but when we allow bitterness to fester, when we allow that stuff to just overtake us and consume us, it is dangerous. It's dangerous for us because much like Absalom, what do? We get fed up, we get disgusted, we turn against people. And oftentimes that's not enough. We turn other people against, the people we want to direct our fury to. And we start our whispers and we start our calls and we start our conversations and we try to turn the loyalty of people. When people are dissatisfied, discontent, and when people are bitter, that's when you see a huge breakdown in relationships and loyalty and cooperation and the help, love, and compassion that we ought to show each other. Absalom is not this loyal, loving, faithful, compassionate king for these people that he has made himself out to be. He has pretended. He has set himself up in an attempt to win the hearts of people. And he's turned people against the king that really did love them. He's turned people against King David. And now David, in fear of his life and in fear for his family and his loyal followers, has had to go on the run. When you read the stories of King David and you read of the sorrows that he endured, how devastating to think, like this was his son doing this. This isn't an enemy, this isn't a Philistine enemy. This isn't, a Syrian rebel. This is his son, right? This is the son of his body. And he's revolted against his father. And such to the point that David feels like we all have to go. Because if we don't go, he's going to kill us. Now, thankfully, and we're going to see here in a couple of coming lessons, there are some that are going to be faithful to David. There are some that are going to be loyal to David. But this conspiracy isn't over. This conspiracy is not over. There's still more to this story. And let's talk some more about that next week. We'll try to finish chapter 15 next time.